I've become an expert at pretending. If there were an award for the most convincing smile, I'd have a shelf full of trophies by now. Tonight, as I stand in the middle of my family's living room, laughter and chatter swirling around me, I wear my mask like a second skin. My lips curve upward. My eyes crinkle at the corners, and I nod along to stories I've heard 100 times before. On the surface, I look like I belong. But inside, I'm counting the minutes until I can escape. It's always the same at these gatherings. My sister, with her perfect hair and sharper tongue, finds a way to slip in a comment about my interesting outfit. My brother, who hasn't called me in months, greets me with a hug that feels more like a performance for the others than any real affection. Even my mother, bustling around with her tray of appetizers, manages to avoid my gaze, as if looking at me too long might remind her of something she'd rather forget. I laugh at their jokes, even when they're at my expense. I accept their backhanded compliments and their pointed silences. I play my part because that's what's expected. After all, who wants to be the one who ruins the mood? Who wants to be the one who admits that beneath the surface everything is not okay? But the truth is, I've been playing this role for years. I've learned to swallow the sting of their words, to brush off the cold shoulders and the whispered conversations that stop when I enter the room. I've learned to hide the ache that settles in my chest every time I realize I'm not really part of this family. Not in the way I long to be. As I stand there, surrounded by people who are supposed to love me, I wonder if they have any idea how much it hurts. I wonder if they notice the way my hands tremble when I reach for a glass, or the way my smile falters when I think no one is looking. I wonder if they care. How much can one heart take before it breaks? It's strange, the things you remember from childhood. The way sunlight filtered through my bedroom curtains on Saturday mornings. The smell of my mother's perfume as she rushed out the door. The sound of my siblings' laughter echoing down the hallway. I used to think those were the memories that would shape me. But it's the other moments, the ones laced with bitterness and disappointment, that have left the deepest marks. I was the youngest, the one who always seemed to be in the way. My sister Claire was 3 years older and already a force to be reckoned with. She had a knack for making me feel small. Her words as sharp as the scissors she used to cut paper dolls. "Why do you always have to follow me?" she'd snap, slamming her bedroom door in my face. My brother Mark was quieter, but his silence was its own kind of cruelty. He'd roll his eyes when I tried to join his games, muttering to his friends that I was just a baby. Still, I tried. I tried so hard to fit in, to earn their approval. I'd draw pictures for Claire, only to have her crumple them up and toss them aside. I'd offer Mark my allowance if he'd let me play with him, but he'd just laugh and walk away. I told myself that if I was patient, if I was good enough, they'd let me in. I clung to that hope like a lifeline. My mother was no help. She was always busy, always distracted. If I complained about Claire's teasing or Mark's indifference, she'd sigh and tell me not to be so sensitive. "You need to toughen up," she'd say, barely glancing up from her magazine. That's just how siblings are, but I knew it wasn't normal. I saw the way other mothers hugged their children, the way they listened and cared. I wanted that so badly it hurt. My father was a shadow in the background, present but never truly there. He'd come home late, tired and irritable, and retreat to his study with a drink in hand. If he noticed the tension between us, he never said a word. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me with a look I couldn't quite decipher, pity maybe, or regret, but he never intervened. I learned early on that I was on my own. School should have been my escape, but it quickly became another battlefield. I was shy, awkward, desperate to make friends. I remember the first day of 3rd grade, clutching my new backpack and hoping this year would be different. But Claire had already warned the other girls about me, spinning stories that made me sound strange and unlikable. By lunchtime, I was sitting alone, picking at my sandwich while the others giggled at the far end of the table. The humiliation that truly set the tone for the years to come happened just a few weeks later. We were in gym class and the teacher announced we'd be picking teams for dodgeball. I stood there heart pounding as captains called out names one by one. My name was never called. I was the last one left, standing alone in the center of the gym while everyone else smirked and whispered. Even the teacher looked uncomfortable, finally assigning me to a team with a shrug. I can still feel the heat rising in my cheeks, the sting of tears I refused to let fall. That was the day I realized that cruelty wasn't just something that happened at home. It could follow you anywhere, and sometimes the people who were supposed to protect you were the ones who planted the seeds. Growing up, I learned to move quietly, to make myself small, to avoid drawing attention. But no matter how invisible I tried to become, the world seemed determined to remind me of my place. The bullying that started at home didn't stay within those four walls. It seeped out, infecting every corner of my life. By middle school, the whispers followed me down the hallways. Claire's friends would snicker as I passed, their eyes sliding over me like I was something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of their shoes. Mark's friends weren't much better. They'd nudge each other and laugh, making jokes I pretended not to hear. Even the neighbors seemed to join in, their smiles tight and insincere when my mother wasn't looking. I'd catch them exchanging glances, shaking their heads as if I was some kind of disappointment they couldn't quite explain. I tried to find refuge in my schoolwork, hoping that if I excelled, someone might finally see me for who I was. But even there, I couldn't escape. My math teacher, Mrs. Evans, seemed to have a special disdain for me. She'd call on me when she knew I didn't have the answer, her voice dripping with impatience. "You really should try harder," she'd say, loud enough for the whole class to hear. The other kids would snicker, and I'd shrink a little more inside myself. There was no safe space, nowhere I could let my guard down. At home, the air was thick with tension. At school, I was a target. Even the library, my last sanctuary, became hostile when a group of girls started leaving cruel notes in my backpack. "Loser. Nobody likes you. Why don't you just disappear?" I'd find them crumpled at the bottom of my bag, my hands shaking as I stuffed them deep into my pockets, hoping no one would see. The loneliness was suffocating. I watched other kids form friendships, laughing and sharing secrets, while I hovered on the edges, desperate for even a scrap of kindness. I became an expert at pretending. I'd paste on a smile, laugh at the right moments, and act like nothing bothered me. I told myself that if I could just hold it together, maybe things would get better. Maybe someone would notice how hard I was trying. But the truth was, every cruel word, every cold shoulder chipped away at me. My self-esteem became a fragile thing, easily shattered by a careless comment or a pointed look. I started to believe the things they said about me, that I was unlovable, unwanted, invisible. I stopped looking in mirrors, unable to face the girl staring back at me. At night, when the house was quiet and everyone else was asleep, I'd let the mask slip. I'd curl up under my blanket, silent tears soaking my pillow. I'd replay the day in my mind, searching for something I could have done differently, some way I could have made them like me. The pain was sharp and relentless, but I refused to let anyone see it. I refused to give them the satisfaction of knowing they'd broken me. So I made a promise to myself. No matter how much it hurt, I would never let them see me cry. I would hold my head high even if it was just an act, because if I let them see my pain, I was afraid I'd never be able to hide it again. And deep down I wondered, would anyone ever care enough to look past the mask and see the real me? It happened on a Sunday, the kind of day that should have been filled with warmth and laughter. My mother had insisted on a family barbecue, inviting not just my siblings but their friends, neighbors, and anyone else who might bear witness to our so-called happy family. I tried to steel myself as I walked into the backyard, the smell of grilled meat mingling with the sharp tang of anxiety in my chest. From the start, I could feel the tension. Claire was in rare form, holding court at the picnic table, her voice carrying over the crowd. She barely acknowledged me, except to make a show of pointing out my unique choice of dress to her friends. Mark, already a few beers in, made a joke at my expense. Something about how I was always the odd one out, always the project no one could fix. The laughter that followed was loud and cruel, echoing in my ears long after the moment had passed. I tried to disappear into the background, but it was impossible. Every time I thought I'd found a quiet corner, someone would find me, their words sharp and dismissive. Even my mother, who should have been my refuge, seemed embarrassed by my presence. She pulled me aside at one point, her voice low and tight. "Can't you just try to fit in for once? You're making things awkward." That was the final blow. I felt something inside me snap, a thread pulled too tight for too long. I excused myself, stumbling upstairs to the guest room, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands, numb with humiliation and pain. The voices from the backyard drifted up through the open window, laughter and music mocking my misery. For the first time, I truly considered leaving. Just walking out the door and never looking back. The thought was both terrifying and strangely liberating. Maybe if I disappeared, they'd finally realize what they'd lost. Or maybe they wouldn't notice at all. I sat there paralyzed by indecision, tears streaming down my face. I felt utterly defeated, like there was nothing left inside me but emptiness. I reached for my phone, not even sure why. Maybe to call a cab, maybe just to hear another human voice. That's when I saw it. A new message from a number I didn't recognize. My breath caught in my throat as I opened it. The words were simple, but they cut through the darkness like a lifeline. "I know what you're going through. You're not alone." For a moment I just stared at the screen, my mind racing. Who could possibly know? Who would care enough to reach out? The despair that had threatened to swallow me whole was suddenly pierced by a flicker of hope. A tiny, fragile spark that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought. I stared at the message, my mind spinning with questions. Who would reach out to me, of all people? My fingers trembled as I typed back a cautious reply. "Who is this?" The response came almost instantly, as if they'd been waiting for me to answer. "It's Aunt Lydia. I know we haven't talked much, but I've seen how they treat you. I just wanted you to know you're not invisible. Aunt Lydia." I remembered her only vaguely. A quiet woman who always sat at the edge of family gatherings, never quite fitting in. She was my father's cousin, I thought, or maybe a distant aunt by marriage. She'd always seemed a little out of place, her gentle voice drowned out by the louder, more boisterous personalities in our family. I never imagined she'd notice me, let alone reach out. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to brush her off, to retreat back into the safety of my solitude. But something in her words, so simple, so direct, broke through my defenses. I found myself typing back, "Thank you. I don't really know what to say. It just feels like no one else sees it." She replied, "I see it. I've seen it for years. And I know how much it hurts. They did the same to me once." Her confession stunned me. I'd always assumed I was the only one, the family's designated outcast. But here was someone who understood. Someone who had lived through the same cold shoulders and whispered jokes. She told me about her own childhood. How she'd been left out, mocked for being different, and made to feel like she was never enough. She described the loneliness, the ache of wanting to belong, and the strength it took to keep going. As I read her messages, something shifted inside me. For the first time, I felt truly seen. Lydia didn't offer empty platitudes or try to minimize my pain. She acknowledged it, validated it, and shared her own scars. She told me that surviving cruelty didn't make me weak, it made me resilient. She reminded me that I wasn't broken, just bruised. We messaged back and forth for hours, the words flowing more easily than I expected. She told me about the small victories she'd claimed over the years, the friends she'd made outside the family, the life she'd built on her own terms. She encouraged me to hold on, to believe that things could get better even if it didn't feel that way now. Before we said goodnight, Lydia hinted at something else, something she'd never told anyone. "There's a reason they act the way they do," she wrote. "A secret that's been kept for a long time. When you're ready, I'll tell you. But for now, just know you're not alone." As I put my phone down, I felt a warmth I hadn't known in years. For the first time, the walls of my isolation didn't feel quite so high. I had an ally, someone who understood, someone who cared. And now I couldn't help but wonder, what secret had Lydia been carrying all these years? The next morning I woke with Lydia's words echoing in my mind. A secret, something that explained the way my family treated me, the way they'd always treated her. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I thought I knew was about to change. I waited until the house was quiet, then messaged her, my heart pounding. I need to know. Please tell me. She called me this time, her voice soft but steady. I've wanted to tell you for years, she began. But I was afraid. Afraid of stirring up old wounds, afraid you'd think less of me or of yourself. But you deserve the truth. I listened, barely breathing, as she told me a story I'd never heard before. Decades ago, before I was born, my father had been engaged to another woman, a woman he loved deeply, but who came from a family my grandmother disapproved of. My grandmother, the matriarch who ruled our family with an iron fist, had always been obsessed with appearances and status. She'd done everything in her power to break them apart, and eventually she succeeded. My father married my mother instead, a match that pleased the family but left him with a heart full of regret. But that wasn't the real secret. The real secret was that my father's first love had been pregnant when they parted ways. She'd left town quietly and no one spoke of her again. Years later, after my parents were married, she returned, alone with a little girl. That girl was Lydia. I felt the world tilt beneath me. Lydia was my half-sister, not just a distant cousin. She'd grown up on the fringes of the family, always present but never truly accepted. My grandmother had made sure of that, whispering poison into everyone's ears, turning them against Lydia and her mother. My father, racked with guilt and shame, had tried to help in small ways, but he'd never acknowledged her publicly. He'd let her carry the burden of his choices, just as he'd let me carry the burden of being different. Lydia's voice trembled as she continued. When you were born, I thought maybe things would change, but instead the jealousy got worse. Your mother resented me and your siblings picked up on it. They saw me as a threat, someone who didn't belong. And when you started to grow up so much like me, quiet, sensitive, always on the outside, they turned that resentment on you too. I sat in stunned silence, the pieces clicking into place. The coldness, the whispered conversations, the way my mother always seemed to look through me. It wasn't just about me. It was about old wounds, old betrayals, and secrets that had festered for decades. I'd been caught in the crossfire of a family war I never even knew existed. A wave of anger washed over me, mingled with a strange sense of relief. For so long I'd blamed myself, convinced that I was the problem. But now I saw the truth. I was never the cause. I was just the easiest target. Lydia's story gave me something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't invisible. I was the living proof of everything my family had tried to hide, and I had a right to the truth. I wanted answers. I wanted apologies. Most of all, I wanted to reclaim the dignity that had been stolen from me, piece by piece over a lifetime. Thank you for telling me, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I promise you, I won't let them keep hurting us. Not anymore. Lydia's voice was gentle, but there was steel beneath it. You're stronger than you think, and you're not alone, not anymore. As I ended the call, I felt a fire ignite inside me. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was ready to fight. I didn't know exactly how I'd confront my family, or what would happen when I did. But I knew one thing for certain. The days of suffering in silence were over. What would I do with this knowledge? I wasn't sure yet, but I was done hiding, and I was done letting their secrets define me. I spent the next few days in a haze, replaying Lydia's words over and over. The truth felt heavy in my chest, but it was a different kind of weight, one that steadied me rather than crushing me. For the first time, I saw my family's cruelty for what it was, a symptom of their own secrets and shame, not a reflection of my worth. I was done being their scapegoat. I was done being silent. When my mother announced another family dinner, I knew it was time. I could have chosen a quieter moment, but I wanted them all together. I wanted them to see me, really see me, and to hear the truth they'd spent so long trying to bury. I dressed with care that evening, choosing a simple dress that made me feel strong. As I looked in the mirror, I saw not the timid girl they'd always dismissed, but a woman who had survived, and who was ready to fight for herself. The house was already buzzing when I arrived. Claire was in the kitchen, barking orders at everyone. Mark lounged on the sofa, scrolling through his phone. My mother flitted from room to room, her smile brittle as glass. I could feel the old anxiety rising, but I pushed it down. I wasn't here to play my old part. Dinner was a tense affair, the conversation stilted and forced. I waited until the plates were cleared, and everyone was gathered in the living room, the air thick with unspoken resentments. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to speak. "I have something to say," I began, my voice steady, "and I want everyone to listen." They all turned to look at me, some with annoyance, others with thinly veiled amusement. I saw Claire's smirk, Mark's eye roll, my mother's impatient sigh. But I didn't back down. For years I've felt like an outsider in my own family. I've been bullied, ignored, and made to feel like I don't belong. I used to think it was my fault, that if I just tried harder you'd accept me. But I know now that it was never about me. It was about secrets, about things you were too afraid to face. My mother's face went pale. Claire's smirk faltered. Mark sat up straighter, his phone forgotten. "I know about Lydia," I said, my voice ringing out in the stunned silence. "I know who she really is."
"I know what happened between Dad and his first love and how the family treated her and me because of it." The room erupted.
My mother jumped to her feet, her voice trembling with anger. "You don't know what you're talking about. That's ancient history. It has nothing to do with you." But I stood my ground. "It has everything to do with me. You let your own pain and jealousy poison this family. You turned me into a scapegoat because you couldn't face your own guilt. Well, I'm done carrying it for you." Claire tried to interrupt, but I cut her off. "You always needed someone to look down on, Claire. Someone to make you feel better about yourself. But I won't be that person anymore." Mark looked away, shame flickering across his face. For the first time I saw uncertainty in his eyes. My mother's voice broke. "We did what we had to do. We protected our family." "No," I said quietly. "You protected your secrets. And you hurt the people who needed you most." The silence that followed was suffocating. I felt exposed, raw, but also powerful. I had spoken the truth, and no one could take that from me. "I'm not asking for your approval anymore," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know that I see you, all of you, for who you really are. And I see myself too. I'm not weak. I'm not broken. I'm done being ashamed." I stood there, heart pounding as the weight of years lifted from my shoulders. I didn't know what would happen next, if they would lash out or finally face the truth. But for the first time I wasn't afraid. How would they react? I didn't know. But I knew one thing. I would never let them silence me again. For a long moment no one spoke. The room felt frozen, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I could see the shock and confusion on my siblings' faces, the way my mother's hands trembled as she clutched a tissue. I expected her to deny everything, to retreat behind her usual wall of coldness, but instead she sat down heavily on the arm of the sofa, her shoulders slumped, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I never wanted it to be like this," she whispered, her voice so small I almost didn't recognize it. "I never wanted you to feel unloved." The words hung in the air, fragile and raw. I waited, unsure if this was another attempt to deflect blame. But then she looked up at me, and for the first time in my life I saw real pain in her eyes. "When I married your father, I thought I was doing the right thing. My family pushed me into it. They said it was a good match, that he would take care of me. But I always knew he loved someone else. I could see it in the way he looked at her even after she was gone. I tried to ignore it, to pretend it didn't matter, but it ate away at me. Every time I looked at you, I saw the parts of him I could never reach. The softness, the quiet strength. I was jealous and I hated myself for it. She wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. I took it out on you. I let your siblings do the same. I thought if I could just make you tougher, you wouldn't get hurt the way I did. But all I did was pass my pain on to you. I'm so sorry. The room was silent except for her quiet sobs. Claire stared at the floor, her face pale. Mark looked away, his jaw clenched. For a moment I felt the old anger rise up in me. The urge to shout, to demand why she hadn't stopped, why she'd let it go on for so long. But beneath the anger was something else, a deep, aching sadness for the woman in front of me, broken by her own regrets. I know I can't undo what I've done, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. But I want to try. If you'll let me. I want to be better. I want us to be better. Her confession was the missing piece, the root of all the bitterness and cruelty that had poisoned our family for so long. It was a chance, a small, fragile chance for healing. But only if I was willing to take it. I looked at her, at my siblings, at the family that had hurt me and hurt themselves in the process. I felt the weight of years pressing down on me, the scars and the strength they'd given me. Forgiveness wasn't easy. It wasn't simple. But maybe, just maybe, it was possible. Would I forgive her? Could I let go of the pain and start again? I didn't know the answer yet. But for the first time I saw a path forward, a path that belonged to me. No matter what I chose, I sat there surrounded by the people who had shaped my life in ways both beautiful and brutal, and felt the storm of emotions raging inside me. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand justice for every wound, every lonely night, every cruel word. Another part, quieter but no less powerful, longed for peace, for the chance to finally lay down the burdens I'd carried for so long. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about excusing what had happened. It wasn't about pretending the pain hadn't been real. It was about choosing myself, choosing to stop letting their actions define me. I could see the hope flickering in my mother's eyes, the uncertainty in my siblings' faces. They wanted absolution, but I needed something more. Respect, honesty, and the freedom to decide what I needed to heal. I took a deep breath, feeling the strength Lydia had helped me find. I can't forget what's happened, I said, my voice steady. And I can't promise to forgive you right away. But I can promise this. I won't let the past control me anymore. I deserve better, and from now on I'm going to set boundaries. If you want to be part of my life, it has to be on my terms. No more secrets, no more cruelty. The words felt like a shield, protecting the fragile hope inside me. I saw the shock on their faces, but also something else. Maybe for the first time, a glimmer of respect. I'm open to healing, I continued. But I need time. I need space, and I need you to show me, not just tell me that things can change. It wasn't vengeance and it wasn't blind forgiveness. It was a choice to honor myself, to reclaim my story. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years, and walked toward the door. I paused, looking back at the family I'd always wanted to belong to. What would my new life look like? I didn't know yet, but for the first time, it would be a life I chose for myself, and that was enough to give me hope. In the weeks and months that followed, I felt myself changing in ways I never thought possible. The old heaviness that used to cling to me like a second skin began to lift, replaced by something lighter, something like hope. I no longer measured my worth by my family's approval or their cold silences. Instead, I started to listen to my own voice, to trust my own instincts, and to honor the resilience that had carried me through so many dark days. Setting boundaries wasn't easy. There were awkward conversations, moments of guilt, and times when I questioned if I was doing the right thing. But each time I stood up for myself, I felt a little stronger. My mother and siblings reached out, sometimes clumsily, sometimes with genuine effort. I let them in, but only as far as I felt safe. I learned that forgiveness is a process, not a single moment, and that it's okay to protect your heart while it heals. The biggest change, though, was finding my own community. I started volunteering at a local support group for people who had experienced family estrangement and bullying. For the first time, I was surrounded by others who understood the pain of being the outsider, the courage it takes to break free, and the joy of building a new life on your own terms. We shared our stories, our scars, and our victories, and in that sharing, I found a sense of belonging I'd never known before. Looking back, I see now that my suffering wasn't just a source of pain. It was also the seed of my strength. I am not defined by what was done to me, but by how I chose to rise above it. I am proud of the woman I've become, someone who can face the truth, set boundaries, and open her heart to new beginnings. If you're listening to my story and see yourself in my words, know this: you are not alone. Your pain is real, but so is your power. Healing is possible even after years of silence. Have you ever faced family bullying? Share your story in the comments. Let's lift each other up and remind the world that no one deserves to suffer in silence.